Hello and welcome back to a new lecture on syntax. In this lecture, we'll look at some problems that we face with X-bar theory as it stands. In particular, we're going to notice that X-bar theory overgenerates. Now, if a theory overgenerates, that means that it can produce sentences that are ill-formed, so sentences that are bad. What do we mean by this? Well, if you recall our X-bar rule, which introduces the head and its complement, we suggested that the complement here was optional. Now we said it was optional because sometimes there's no complement needed. Like in this sentence, John smiled. So then if this is the rule that we're going by, what can this rule produce? Let's take a look at a few sentences and see. So now here's the rule we're dealing with. X bar gives rise to the obligatory X head and an optional YP, or a complement. Notice again now that this is optional. Now let's look at our sentences. John loves Mary is fine, but John loves is ill-formed. If the complement was actually optional, then there's no reason why this sentence should be ill-formed. It seems here like these two sentences are showing us that the complement is obligatory, because when it's not here, the sentence is ungrammatical or ill-formed. How about this sentence? John smiled is fine. John smiled the door is ill-formed. Now these two show us the exact opposite. They show us that we should not have a complement. Let's look at the next set. John gave Mary a book. This one's fine. But John gave Mary is not. John gave a book is not. And John gave is not. Now the last set of sentences shows us that not only is the direct object complement obligatory, but also the indirect object is also obligatory. Therefore, we say that X bar, as it is right now, can produce sentences that are ill-formed. Therefore, we say that X bar, so far, overgenerates. So what can we do? Again, to explain this, X bar is too powerful. X bar creates several different options for sentences and phrase structure. Let's call them 1, 2, 3, and 4. But the problem is the only ones that we find that are actually well formed are maybe just 2 and 3. So we need a system that would block out 1 and 4, for example, and only give us 2 and 3 as a final product that is well formed. We don't want to go and change X bar completely because that would be almost impossible. Instead, what we want to do is have X bar produce all of these and then have a secondary system that would pick out only the ones that are well formed. Now from our sentences here, it seems that certain verbs require certain complements. Loves, for example, requires a DP complement. Smiled, on the other hand, requires that there be no complement. Gave requires not 1, but 2 complements. So apparently it looks like not only we have to take into consideration what X bar states, but after that we have to take into consideration the special cases of each and every verb. These are the special restrictions that these verbs put on the output of X bar theory. Where can we get this extra set of restrictions on verbs? Well, we can get it from the lexicon. The lexicon is our mental dictionary. It is where we store all of our words inside our brains. That's why we call it a mental dictionary. So then the lexicon contains words. For each word, there has to be a list of information that is available. The lexicon must give us, for each word, its meaning. It must give us its syntactic category, like whether it's a noun, a verb, and so on. It should give us the pronunciation of the word. It should also store information about any irregularities or exceptional cases, like morphological irregularities. For example, we would expect that the past tense form of eat is eated, but in fact it is ate. So this kind of information, or exceptions or irregularities, must also be stored for each word. And finally, it must give us the the argument structure of the word. So let's focus on verbs in particular. What do we mean by the argument structure? Well, the restrictions on X bar will come from two different sources. Number one would be what we call the subcategorizational restrictions. Now this would tell us if a verb requires one argument, or two arguments, or three arguments. And then we have the selectional restrictions. Now these are semantic in nature. What these restrictions will do will tell us that it is fine to say that John loves Mary, but it is not okay to say that the rock loves Mary, because the rock cannot love. So this is semantic information. Now using both of these types of restrictions, the subcategorizational restrictions and the selectional restrictions, we can block out or filter out the bad sentences that X bar produces and be left only with the well-formed or the good sentences. So let's take a look at each type of restriction. Let's start with the subcategorizational restrictions. Alright, so let's see. So we could have a verb, V, that requires only one argument, a DP that comes before it. So this line here will indicate where the verb is. And this verb requires only one argument before it. This would be the subject, of course. Now we call this type of verb an intransitive verb. An example is the word leave. So we say John left. If you notice, there's nothing after it. All this verb requires is just one argument before it. A second type of verb requires two arguments. One before, then the verb, and one after. We call this one a transitive type 1. An example is the word hit, as in John hit Bob. So one before and one after. But notice that this is a DP. There's a third type of verb that requires a DP argument before it, and after it, it can take either a DP or a CP. This is called a transitive type 2. An example is the word ask, as in John asked the man, so that would be the DP, or John asked if he could leave, so that is a CP. As you see here, it can take a DP or a CP. That is type 2. A third type of transitive verb takes a DP before it, and after it takes another DP, but also it takes a third argument which can either be a DP or a prepositional phrase. This is what we call transitive type 3. An example is the word give, as in John gave Mary a book. A book is a DP, Mary is a DP, and John is a DP. Therefore, the verb gave takes one argument before and two arguments after. Now, according to this here, it can take only a DP argument, and then its third argument would be either a DP or a prepositional phrase. Let's take the second option, prepositional phrase, and show an example about that. Instead of John gave Mary a book, we could easily say John gave a book to Mary. And so we have here a DP and here a PP instead. That would be the second option here. The last type of subcategory of verb is a verb that takes a DP before it, a DP after it, and then one of three options, either a DP or a PP or a CP. This is what we call a ditransitive. An example is the word tell. So we could have John told Mary, and let's take DP, the story. So that's a DP and a DP. Now let's take PP. We could say John told Mary to leave. How about a CP? John told Mary that he was happy. So now it takes a DP, a CP, and a DP before it, as so. So now we can go back and look at these sentences here where we had our problems. Just by using the subcategorizational restrictions, we now know that this type of verb is an intransitive verb. meaning it is a verb that only takes a DP before it. But the problem in this one is that we gave it another DP after it, and that should not be the case. Likewise, we know that this type of verb is a transitive type 3, meaning it should take 3 arguments, 1 before and 2 after. Now in this case it only takes 2 arguments, and so it is ill-formed. Same here, and in this one it only takes 1 argument, and so it is ill-formed. So now, as you can see, the subcategorizational restrictions are able to filter out some of the bad sentences. But they can't filter out everything. We still need some selectional restrictions. Here's an example of why. Take for example the sentence, "The rock hit Bob." Now we know that hit is a transitive verb. It requires 2 arguments, 1 before and 1 after. It also requires that these arguments are DPs. This is a DP and this is a DP as well. So everything seems in line. X-bar theory is fine. The subcategorizational restrictions are also fine. But the sentence sounds odd. This is the sign that we use to indicate that the sentence makes no sense. So this sentence makes no sense from a semantic point of view. To summarize then, subcategorizational restrictions helped us so far in eliminating some of these sentences that were ill-formed, but it doesn't take care of the job completely. We still have those sentences that don't make sense. That would be the job of the selectional restrictions, or the more semantic-like restrictions. Those restrictions that would block such sentences as "The rock loves Mary." That's going to be our topic for the next lecture. See you there.